Thank you for joining us for the 83rd edition of Ask the Governor, every month since April of 2016. John Bell Edwards has been in the house, and he's at your service if you'd like to join the conversation. 877-217-5757. The governor, a year from now, will be a private citizen. Somebody else will be in the chair. Who knows, they might even be doing a radio show, but we will soon know, qualifying a few months away, officially who is on the ballot. And today a development happened that would indicate one man is seriously considering the race, and that's Dr. Sean Wilson, who for the last 7 years plus has been the Department of Transportation Secretary and Department of Transportation and Development. Dr. Wilson informed the governor that he will retire from state service effective March 4th, 2023, as in 2 weeks. Governor Edwards, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it was just today that Secretary Wilson came to see me and gave me his letter, letting me know he would retire on March the 4th. 28 years of state service, and the last 7 as secretary. You know, when I appointed him, he was the only African-American Secretary of Transportation anywhere in the country. Subsequently, he served as the president of AASHTO, which is all of the secretaries of transportation around the country have that association. They elected him president. He was the first African American to serve in that capacity as well. But he was just a truly dedicated, committed, competent public servant. 28 years total in service to the state, I think is the number. I have enjoyed working with him, and look, it was a very difficult situation when we first came into office a little over 7 years ago, when we had the largest budget deficit in our history. But we've righted the ship, and we've invested tremendously in infrastructure across the state of Louisiana: roads, bridges, ports, airports, you name it. And Sean has done a wonderful job, and we have more cones and barrels and so forth out right now because construction has taken place at a record clip, especially with the infrastructure bill that we have. But we also use a considerable portion of our one-time funding, surplus, excess, and so forth, in order to advance that. And so he's just been a tremendous public servant, smart and articulate. I've enjoyed working with him, and obviously a little bittersweet today to accept that letter from him, but I wish him nothing but the best going forward.
And it appears that he may very well be seeking the job that you hold. And on a previous edition of this program, you didn't endorse him, but you certainly spoke well if he made that decision to run.
Yeah, look, he's absolutely capable, eminently qualified, and would do a wonderful job. I'm not making news today on that front. I know that he gave me a letter indicating his intention to retire March the 4th. The next step for him is one that he's going to announce, and I'm just not going to get in front of him. But I can tell you we would be very well served to have Sean Wilson as our next governor should he choose to run, and should the people of Louisiana choose to vote for him.
And the election, as hard as it may be to absorb, is now inside 8 months. 8 months from yesterday is the October 14th primary. People are still jockeying and considering, but we have Sean Wilson as a likely candidate. We have Jeff Landry, who's been in for a little while now, and John Schroeder, and some state lawmakers, Sharon Hewitt, Richard Nelson. Looks like it'll be a crowded field, but it could get more crowded. Do you think there'll be any late surprises?
Well, there almost always are. I know that there are some people who are still considering it, and then it seems like every cycle some just come completely out of the blue towards the end, and not meaning that they're not serious candidates, but they'll just decide very late because they see a lane and they decide that it's worth pursuing. But every day every day going forward, the field seems to be, relatively set. And I think it gets harder every day that you wait from this point forward to get in the race. Because it's 4.65 million people in Louisiana. Not that many registered voters, but you got to introduce yourself to a lot of folks.
3 million but registered voters. But it was 10 years ago this week that you announced.
Yes.
So you ran for 2.5 years.
Correct.
and it helped you.
Well, but I had no choice. I didn't have the name recognition to get in late. I didn't have the funding to build my name recognition late. And so I decided that I was serious about it, and got out and really worked hard for a very long time, with the support of my wife once she overcame the displeasure at how I announced on your radio program, Jim,
In the same seat where you are.
in response to a question that you asked that I did not anticipate.
Well, you said what was in your heart.
But I'm told it was the poorest strategic announcement of someone running for governor in the history of our state. Except that the results turned out pretty good for me.
It turned out well for you, and I remember the headline: "Another Edwards running for governor." And it's been. When's the last time we had a Democratic governor not named Edwards?
Well, it was Kathleen Blako.
That's right. That's right. And we had Buddy Roemer, who was elected as a Democrat and then became a Republican and never won another race. Now the Democratic Party, Tyler Bridges did a story this week. I think only Sean Wilson will probably be the second one. But of all the statewide races, there are only two announced Democrats. What's going on in the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I don't know that I can speak to what's happening all over. I am having some conversations. I do expect that there will be several more announcements in the relatively near future about additional candidates running for statewide office, and I don't have anything in terms of another Democrat potentially running for governor. In addition to Secretary Wilson, should he decide and announce to do that. But I think you're going to see some movement over the next few weeks.
And on the show I host in the mornings, people have speculated that you would be a great candidate for Attorney General. That would be interesting, but I gather that's not in the cards. But it's fun to think about.
Donna's been my Valentine for 40 years. I don't know that she'd make 41 if I did that.
But well, we'll see. Can you imagine? John Bel Edwards as Attorney General and the current Attorney General as governor? That would be turnabout. Some would say fair play. We'll talk more with John Bel Edwards. Your number 877-217-5757. We go to the phones after this quick timeout. Jerry Mayer of Hometown Productions has been with us. So this is not only a radio presentation, it's a multimedia presentation, thanks to Jerry. And if you are so inclined, lines will open up. We'll get to as many callers as we can, and the governor of Louisiana is here for you. Brian in Shreveport. Let's start with Brian in Shreveport. Robin, good afternoon.
Yes. Hi, Jim, and hi, Governor. This is Brian Salvatore from Shreveport, and I'm calling to ask you about an issue which I'm sure you're very aware of. I just don't think you have done enough. And this is with regards to the open burning and open detonation of very hazardous chemicals in Grant Parish by Clean Harbors Colfax. This is the only corporate entity of its kind in the entire nation that is allowed to do that. And it's right here in Louisiana under your watch. And I just want to know why you haven't shown stronger leadership here, working with your Secretary for the LDEQ, Dr. Chuck Carr-Brown, and directed him in a way such that this is put to an end.
Dr. Salvatore, thank you very much for your call. What I can tell you is that the Department of Environmental Quality is compiling, assimilating, looking at public comments now that have come in with respect to that facility and its future going forward. And I'm not prepared to make any news here because I haven't received final word from the agency as to what that's going to look like going forward. But I do know that a number of folks there in Grant Parish and elsewhere have expressed concern about the open burning of the materials there. And I know that is being looked at very hard. I don't think it's going to be much longer before we find out what the Department of Environmental Quality is going to do. But I would, and I'm not prepared to make news on that today because quite frankly, I don't know. I know that Dr. Chuck Carr Brown is obviously interested in protecting our environment, but also making sure that all of the standards that are enforceable are in fact enforced and so forth. And we are looking at the things that you just mentioned, and they were all part of the public comment that they are putting together. So I think I'm going to leave it there, but it won't be much longer before we have that. And either you'll be pleased, I suspect, or not pleased, but we may have an opportunity to discuss that again later.
Thank you, Ryan. James in Longview, Texas. Hello, James. You're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Well, hi, Jim, and hi, Governor Edwards. I was reading in the news where you signed a bill recently designed to incentivize insurance companies into writing policies in the state. Can you kind of elaborate more on this bill, and how will $45 million be spent dollar for dollar, or what?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much, James, for calling. So we had a special session recently that ended successfully after 5 days. Started on a Monday, wrapped up on a Friday. They passed 2 bills, and basically these bills are appropriation instruments that put money into the Insure Louisiana Incentive Fund, which was a program that was resurrected last year by the legislature, but not funded. And it seeks to bring in additional insurers into Louisiana and or to get insurers in our state already to write more policies and thereby allow homeowners and business owners an opportunity to get insurance or to depopulate Citizens, which is the state-run insurer of last resort. And we have far too many policies in Citizens, about 4 times as many as we had going into the 2020 hurricane season, for example. The $45 million has to be matched dollar for dollar by the companies, and then they have to write policies that are at least 2 for 1 on that. So the $45 million actually seeks to inject $180 million into the market around Louisiana in either new policies or policies that come out of Citizens. And the reason it had to be done when it was, and couldn't wait until the regular session in April, was so that the insurers would be able to know that the program was up and running, that the fund had received appropriated money, and that they could get the grants and go out and purchase the reinsurance that was necessary for the upcoming hurricane season. And the Commissioner Donlin thought that the timing was critically important. So certainly something that worked after Katrina, and it doesn't solve all of our problems, and nobody should expect that this is going to fix all the problems and all of a sudden everybody who needs insurance is going to have it and Citizens is going to be depopulated to where it was before the 2020 hurricane season, and everybody's premiums is going to be eminently more affordable. But it is something that does work, and it helps with all of those things, and there's still some more work to do.
Thank you, James, one of our most frequent callers. Always great to hear from you. 877-217-5757 is your Ask the Governor number. I think the legislative session is just over 7 weeks away, and the governance of libraries appears to be a hot-button issue. There are already 2 or 3 bills to regulate boards. Your view on that, Governor?
Well, I mean, I have never had anyone tell me in Louisiana that there was a problem with the way that our libraries work, either libraries that function as part of a school or libraries that function, just public libraries out in the community. It seems to me that this is an effort that's more about politics than about real problems. I'm interested to see what all the bills are that get filed and read through them and reserve the right to do whatever is required with whatever actually hits my desk, should any of those hit the desk. But I would just ask people, I know this is an election year. It's a fiscal session. It's 2 months only. And so there are bill filing limitations. I would just ask legislators and the public to understand that this is an election year. You typically see some things that are meant to drive politics and not policy. And And I think this is in that regard because I don't know of a problem that needs to be corrected out there. And this is another example of a cultural issue that we can pursue, and we can spend a lot of time on it. It's not going to create a job. It's not going to build a road. It's not going to educate a child. It's not going to do any of the things that we need to be doing here in Louisiana.
This is, in some ways, similar as far as a social issue that could gain steam is the transgender legislation. And that one, of course, ultimately was passed, and you allowed it to become law without your signature after vetoing it the year before and having your veto sustained. These social issues, are they irresistible for some candidates for office?
Well, I think they are for some candidates for office. And look, it's a national playbook. This is not like these are people sitting here in Louisiana trying to decide these issues. There is a national playbook at issue, and I think the transgender bill was a perfect example. Not in the history of our state has there been one case of a transgender girl participating in sports that they sought to prevent. Never happened. But if it's being done elsewhere, by God, we're going to do it here in Louisiana too. And I just find that unfortunate. We should make better use of our time.
And as noted, you ran for governor. You were successful, and you did so as a moderate, maybe what some would say right of center Democrat. But yet when you are on the other side of these hot button social issues, I've heard it. People say you're part of the, quote, woke left.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means. And in fact, I think they're using the word so much that it's lost all meaning because it's just something they say anytime they're opposed to a position. But I don't believe in discrimination. I don't believe in going out and advancing legislation on cultural issues when there is not a problem to be resolved. I think that's purely divisive. I think it's only done for political purposes. And it's always being done at someone's expense. And with respect to the transgender bill, it was at the expense of children. These are children, and they're very small in number, very, very small percentage of folks who are just trying to get up every day and survive. And I've just felt like it was piling on, and in a way that is terribly unfortunate when you understand that these kids are most likely to have bouts of depression, suicidal ideation, and attempts, and so forth, and it comes because of the way they are treated. And the bill itself, while I don't think it was the intention of the author or most of the people who voted for it, that's how it's viewed by those young people. It's just more of the same, and because there was not a problem to be corrected. If you believe that it's a problem as it was identified, you could not believe it was happening in Louisiana because it wasn't.
But it raged on for 2 years, as you know, and the first time the state was in danger of losing the Final Four if reports were accurate.
Well, we had received information to that effect. Whether that would have happened, I don't know. What I do know is it wasn't anything that was necessary for our state. And it was, again, a national playbook issue. And there have been Republican governors who have vetoed similar bills.
The one in Arkansas did.
Yes, and I think Utah, Indiana, maybe. But in any event, we are where we are. I think that's unfortunate. And by the way, I really don't impugn the motive of the people who advanced the bills or who voted for it. I just believe what the effect was extremely unfortunate.
We live in a state that is reflective of the country in which the major urban centers in Louisiana, they're Democratic strongholds. But the rural areas are overwhelmingly Republican, so overwhelming that Donald Trump won here twice in Louisiana by 400,000 votes. What does that do when people come to the legislature from all these places, some big cities, some small towns, and it's not just them, but their constituents have a whole different worldview?
Yeah, first of all, it makes it very interesting and exciting, and sometimes it can be very dramatic in terms of of the way legislation plays out and committee testimony goes and that sort of thing. But I will tell you that even today, and things are much closer to Washington than they used to be. The dynamic at play at the state capitol in Baton Rouge is very different than it is in Washington. I routinely see Democrats and Republicans who are together off the floor talking. They're having supper. They're visiting and so forth, and they're genuinely friendly towards one another. And so there is a much better dialogue here that is healthier for our state than I think you see in Washington. But there is no doubt that we are definitely trending in the direction of Washington, and nobody can think that's a good thing. I mean, there is just way too much dysfunction there.
We started the program today by revealing the announcement from Dr. Shawn Wilson, Secretary of Transportation, who gave the governor his letter of resignation effective March 4th. He will be leaving the office that he's held for over 7 years and presumably will be in the race for governor of Louisiana. Now, you've had remarkably low turnover in high places in 2 terms. Usually they're 1 or 2 switches in an average time in a cabinet position in 1 term. And you have, it's easy to see, appointed more minorities than any other governor before to high places in Louisiana government. What are your thoughts about that as one of your principal legacies?
Well, I committed to doing that while I was running for governor, is I wanted to have an administration that looked like the state of Louisiana, male, female, African-American, white, Hispanic, whatever. And I think it's very important. The optics are important because you want young people to see someone who looks like they do in high positions so that they can aspire to that and know that that's within their reach as well. But secondly, it's more about excellence, because if all of the people around the table look like me, there will be problems that we don't recognize and solutions that we would never consider. And so having that diversity of thought and perspective is incredibly important too. And I am so proud of the people that have worked, not just at cabinet levels, but across the administration and on boards and commissions and so forth, and really appreciate their service.
And a listener notes that you also have appointed some Republicans. I can think of Jay Darden, your Mark Cooper. I may be missing a few, but you've reached out to the other side, as they say.
Well, sure, and Mark Cooper is certainly a Republican, my chief of staff. But let's just talk about Jay Darden. So the biggest challenge that we had coming into office was the $2 billion budget deficit for the year that started July 1st of 2016. Knew that this was going to be very hard to fix, and it wasn't going to be fixed in one special session or even in one regular session. But to have Jay Darden, who has been the former Senate Finance Committee member and chairman and so forth, join the administration and then become the commissioner of administration and in charge of the budget and fiscal matters, I think was incredibly important. And he's done a wonderful job. But it gave me, I think, a lot more credibility with a bigger slice of the legislature than would have otherwise been the case. And that, too, is having an administration that looks like Louisiana. Like I said, it's not just male, female, black, and white, but political party as well.
877-217-5757 is your number for Governor John Bel Edwards. Patricia in Baton Rouge. Patricia, you're on Ask the Governor. Hi.
Hey, good afternoon, Governor and Mr. Inkster. I've read a report by the American Hospital Association that the Medicaid expansion, if accepted by a state, resulted in fewer rural hospital closings than in the states that did not accept the expansion. And so I was wondering what other advantages this expansion brought to Louisiana, and if there's any chance that it might be rolled back. Thank you.
Well, certainly the next governor has the decision to make as to whether to repeal the Medicaid expansion. As you all will remember, I did it by executive order on my first day. Now, I think it's extremely unlikely because the benefits of Medicaid expansion have been enormous, and we have about 9% of our working age adults without insurance. It was closer to 23, 24%, one of the nation's highest when I became governor. It helped us solve the budget challenge because it costs 10 cents on the dollar to insure them, and the 10 cents comes from the providers who put assessments on themselves. It doesn't cost 40 cents on the dollar from the general fund for the uninsured because they're no longer uninsured when they receive treatment. For example, hospitals have not closed, including in rural Louisiana. That's not the case in other parts of the Deep South where they haven't expanded Medicaid. So there's all sorts of good things that have happened from the Medicaid expansion, including having a healthier population to deal with COVID, which obviously we didn't know about in 2016 when we expanded, but I'm so thankful that we did. Now, a future governor could do it. I think when he or she looks at it, they would decide very quickly, oh, no, there's absolutely no reason to do that. In fact, there are 11 states, I think it's 11, and I may be slightly off, that haven't expanded Medicaid. Not a single state that expanded has reversed that decision, even though they now have had multiple governors, some with different parties, because they understand the benefits of it. And the rural hospitals, the hospital association, other providers, they all speak very favorably about Medicaid expansion. And I know this is something they're talking to everyone who's running, not just for governor, but for legislature next year. So I don't think that it's likely to happen. I do hope that every person running for governor will answer the question very clearly and unequivocally. Will they support the continued expansion of Medicaid? I expect all of those answers to be in the affirmative.
I talked to a person the other night, a Republican lady, who said you may not be her favorite governor, but her quote was, "That man can handle a crisis." And what do you make of what's going on in Turkey right now, in Syria?
Oh, wow.
That earthquake. And of course, the United States is as vulnerable as any other country to something like that.
Well, we're as vulnerable. Hopefully our building standards are more elevated. You know, in Syria, we haven't been waging a civil war for all this time, and where they can't even get aid to a significant part of the population because the leader of Syria insists that no aid be funneled through the rebels and so forth. But it is heartbreaking. And I think the death toll is now close to 40,000.
Yep.
They're going to be finding people for a long time. Very few from this point forward will be survivors. When you have a disaster that happens without warning on that scale, you need help from the international community. And they are getting significant help from the international community. But the remoteness of the areas where this impacted, the weather is making it very difficult. I will tell you, it was tough enough dealing with all the hurricanes and COVID here. I literally the other night was thinking about, what if I were the leader of Turkey? What if I were leading some of those relief efforts? It would be challenging beyond anything that I can imagine.
There are amazing stories of human survival. I see one in today's New York Times for about 200 hours. That's 8.5 days. 2 Turkish brothers entombed
sharing protein powder.
Yeah. They lived on protein powder.
Can you imagine? And it's very cold. It's not like these are ideal weather circumstances. It's very, very cold. There's all sorts of things that you can die from in 8.5 days if you don't have access to water and nutrition, and it's cold. I mean, hypothermia is very hard to, in any event, that is miraculous. I hope we see and read about many more stories like that, but we know from experience that going forward, there won't be many more survivors, unfortunately.
I'm not trying to be flippant because there really is not an accurate comparison, but when you were doing your Army Ranger training, did you get deprivation tests not like this, but
not like that, not 8.5 days, but you are sleep deprived on purpose. You are food deprived on purpose, and those things working in concert. And I went through in the winter time as well. they do have an impact on your ability to function, to think, and to make your body do what you know it needs to be doing it at some point in time. And all of that training is very intentional. And one of the things that you want to do if you're in the armed forces is experience as few things for the first time as possible in war. So this training is designed to kind of take you up to that point. But it was tough, but I made it through, and I'm very, very thankful for that.
And you know the meaning of leather.
I do. If a fresh skin of an animal clean and divested of all hair, fat, and other extraneous matter be immersed in a dilute solution of tannic acid, a chemical combination ensues. The gelatinous tissue is converted to a non-protrusible substance impervious to and insoluble in water. This, sir, is leather.
I bet it took a few days to get that down.
It did, but they expect you to know it 10 minutes after you showed up.
And you know it forevermore.
You do know it forevermore because it is reinforced.
And how many of your fellow West Point people are coming in for the West Point Army LSU game?
I don't have the numbers, but I will tell you I'm very proud of my classmates. A number of 4-star and 3-star generals at the highest levels of the Army today serving around the world.
You're listening to Ask the Governor, another quarter hour. Robin Dow producing and Governor John Bel Edwards in the house. If you'd like to get in under the wire, 877-217-5757. This governor was tested by a number of natural disasters, and including a well-publicized tragedy involving the death of Alton Sterling and police officers being killed shortly thereafter. That was in his first year. And then many other calamities involving the environment occurred, and he has gotten rave reviews, and also he went through a pandemic with us as the leader of this state. When you look back on that, is that your crowning achievement?
Well, look, unfortunately, we've had a number of disasters, and nobody would want that to happen ever. But fortunately, we have a very good team of dedicated public servants who are experienced and the very best in the country in preparing for it, responding to, and recovering from natural disasters. And so my hat is off to all of those folks. And look, I know that there are people who disagreed with some of the decisions I made, especially in COVID. But, you do the very best you can with the information that you have. And it was a public health emergency. I believe that you ought to default to the public health experts, the epidemiologists, the infectious disease folks. You listen to the folks coming out of the federal agencies, and particularly the White House task force dealing with it. And you look at the data in state, and you just try to make the very best decisions you can to protect life to the degree that you can, while you also make sure that essential businesses stay open and so forth. None of those decisions were easy, and I know it's awfully tempting for people who didn't have access to all the information that I have to second guess and so forth. And that's the right as Americans. You get to do that, and you get to express your opinion. But we did the very best that we could, and there again, we had a tremendous team with Dr. Bijou, then Dr. Joe Cantor, the leadership at the Department of Health, and really folks all over the state. So we have been blessed by the people who serve here in Louisiana. I wish we had less experience dealing with disasters, but unfortunately, being centrally located on the Gulf Coast, I think, and this is borne out, by the way, with a study that came out recently. If you go back to 1980 and you look at all of the natural disasters and you look at them in inflation-adjusted dollars, nobody comes close to Louisiana.
Well, climate change, whatever way you want to term it, is having an effect on the world, and in Louisiana, our world. And as we look ahead a century from now, Louisiana may look much differently. Can anything be done to thwart the inevitable?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, we have a coastal restoration and protection master plan that envisions a minimum of $1 billion invested over 50 years. I'm sorry, $50 billion over 50 years, $1 billion a year. We're on track this year, $1.3 billion, in fact. But it is very difficult, but these restoration protection projects do work. We know that. They're based on science. And quite frankly, the projects that we have completed held up well to Laura and to Delta and to Ida. So those are some things that we can do. But also, I think we have to recognize the degree to which human behavior adds to the impacts of global warming and climate change that are driving these more frequent and more severe storms. We contribute more CO2 emissions per capita than any other state, and we're suffering more from climate change than any other state. 2,000 square miles of coast lost since 1930 from subsidence and sea level rise. We don't have the coastal marsh to act as a storm buffer the way that we did, and so forth. So we have to move forward on the climate change front too, and we are in Louisiana. We're diversifying. We're embracing the energy transition. We're receiving tremendous investments as a result: wind, solar, carbon capture, sequestration, hydrogen, ammonia, biofuels, you name it. It's an all of the above approach. And I think it's going to serve us well from an economic development perspective. And quite frankly, it's the only way 50 years from now we'll still be an energy leader. It'll be because we embraced the transition when we did.
Mike and Metairie. Mike, you're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Yes. Look, I just wanted to pose a question to the governor, and a lot of other homeowners, I'm sure, his question or hadn't thought about it. I'm just wondering if Jim Donnellan is a part of the solution or a part of the problem. It appears by everything that I've experienced and people that I've questioned or whatever, that the insurance companies just chose what they wanted to pay and what they did not want to pay just at will.
Well, last year I went on a statewide tour to listen to homeowners who had issues with their insurers in terms of the delays associated with their claims, the low payments, the denial of payments, much of which just absolutely couldn't be explained. And quite frankly, I embraced and endorsed a number of bills in the legislature to try to address that. Only a couple of them actually made it through, and don't ever think that the insurance lobby, despite very poor performance in our state by insurers, they still have a very strong voice there, unfortunately. And I think if you go back and listen to some of the testimony that Commissioner Donnellan offered, some of the companies that went became insolvent and couldn't pay claims, it appears that their solvency wasn't strong enough for them to ever enter the market. They weren't properly capitalized, and they weren't buying the reinsurance necessary to make sure they could respond to the disasters that we ultimately had. And I think he accepted some responsibility for that. And I'm not trying to speak for him, but one of the things that he committed to the legislature when he was promoting the appropriation that I talked about earlier in this show to the incentive fund was that he would do a much better, more thorough vetting to make sure that these are quality insurers, properly capitalized, that they do get the reinsurance, and that this continues over time because it's a 5-year program. So you can't take a snapshot at the beginning, but it has to be something that is tracked and monitored and required throughout the life of the program. I believe he has committed to do that. But that's as close as I'm going to come to the way you asked the question, Mike.
Governors, sometimes stories, they take a life of their own, and one of those is the Dale Brown Sue Gunner Court.
Yeah, I think you and I probably have a little different ideas about that. But
we do, but I'm okay with that. But Sue now has her name on the court, and she was a great lady, and 22 years as coach at LSU, and Coach Brown, of course, his name will remain. But she has a statue. He doesn't. He did accomplish quite a bit at LSU. Is there something that can be done beyond having his name shared with hers on the court at the Assembly Center, the Pete Maravich Assembly Center? Is there something that could be done on his behalf that would be appropriate? Yeah,
well, certainly I think there can be and probably should be. And a lot of the reasons that people offered for why his name was properly on the court, and I don't have any issues with this, were a lot of things that he did off the court that weren't necessarily principally about basketball. But I will tell you, when I looked at his body of work and Coach Gunter's body of work over the years, win percentage, wins of losses, SEC winning percentage, Final Fours, and championships and so forth, I really saw a lot of equivalency there. And so when I was asked my opinion, I said, yeah, I think that the proper thing would have been in the first instance, and it could be corrected, and I think it was, at least from my position, it was corrected, that her name could be added with his. Unfortunately, for some people, this took on the air as this was somehow something that was being done to diminish Coach Brown's legacy. And I don't believe that that's accurate. I think it's very unfortunate. I have tremendous respect for him. I actually know him. I know him to be a very good person. I know him to be someone who contributes in a lot of different ways. And I have tremendous appreciation for what he did at LSU. But when I look at the total body of work of the two coaches, I could only conclude that she was as deserving as him to have her name on the court. But for other things that he's done that maybe she didn't do in different ways, there surely has to be additional honors that would be appropriate to confer upon Coach Brown.
A statue?
Well, perhaps and I have no problems with that at all. But there's a process at LSU to go through for all of that, and I know that process was followed. Most recently, it wasn't followed a year ago. But if that's something that the board is and others want to do, I certainly have absolutely no problem with that.
It is amazing, and maybe it's one of the good things in America. We value symbols, and symbols can be good or bad, and we hold them near and dear, or we want to get rid of them if they're not appropriate for our society. And this is an example of that.
No, I think that's right. And look, I never had anybody telling me that Sue Gunner wasn't a very good person and who didn't make tremendous contributions, do a lot of good at LSU with the women's basketball program. I never had anybody tell me that Dale Brown wasn't a good person who made significant contributions and so forth. But as you mentioned, symbols are very, very important, and I think we have to be careful when and how we choose to do that. But there's a process at LSU to follow, and at all of our universities. And if there's an effort to go through that process and to do something else for Coach Brown at LSU, or if there's some other award, because that he would be, worthy recipient of, I would absolutely support that as well.
Well, thank you, Governor. For those of us who treasure Coach Brown, it's nice for you to say.
By the way,
good things.
I'm one of those people.
I know.
I'm one of those people.
I know.
I know it. I like it.
Thank you for listening to Ask the Governor.